Hi everyone! Today we have a new tutorial for the mini gouache painting series that I have on my channel. We're gonna go through these two very simple springy paintings that are done using almost exactly the same colors, so you can easily paint them in the same painting session. So without further introductions, let's get started here. I'm using a B5 size watercolor sketchbook. This is by Etchr Lab, and I decided to line the edges of these paintings with a washi tape so we'll get clean edges at the end. Washi tape is a little bit less sticky than regular tape, which helps to not rip the paper when you remove them. But then we're gonna start from the painting on the left side, and the first thing we're gonna do is paint the sky. I'll show you all the colors I use for the sky here, and all the tools I'm using are also listed in the video description. These were the main background colors I used in both of these paintings, but if you don't own these exact colors, don't worry about it. You can achieve something very similar by mixing other colors as well. If you need to do some mixing, you'll definitely need quite a lot of white paint because almost all the colors we're using today are very light and pastel-y to achieve this soft, springy vibe. But anyway, I started with this bigger flat brush and these light blue and light coral pink shades. So these colors are already very light, but I still mixed some white with them, and I wanted the background to have this subtle gradient from the blue color to the coral peach, and then finally to a light orangey peach shade. All you have to do to achieve that is to swipe these colors all across the painting, and whenever I tried to switch a color, I mixed the two colors together and added some white as well, which will help to blend things together even more. And if you feel like at any point that the colors look too dark, you can always add a light layer of white on top to smooth things out. The background layer didn't take much time at all, and you could totally leave the sky like this and move on to the flowers, but I decided to add a few fluffy white clouds here as well. I switched to a much smaller flat brush, and let's start by saying that painting clouds can definitely be quite tricky, and it took me a while to figure out a method here too. It's been a while since I painted clouds, but I would maybe advise you to start with very light layers of white. So first mix a little bit more water with the paint and then start creating these loose half circle shapes. I think it's usually a good idea to mainly focus on painting these top parts of the clouds, so you can almost imagine that there is this pretty straight line at the bottom of the cloud shape, and then we're mainly painting above that. I think it creates the most natural cloud shapes, but of course that's just a guideline and other shapes are absolutely possible too. Anyway, I've noticed that white paint can sometimes kind of disappear to the background after it dries, especially if you use a lot of water. But that's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to painting clouds. So I quite liked having some very light fluffs here and there, and then you can take more of the white paint with a drier brush and add some heavier white layers to parts of the clouds, which adds dimension and nice texture to them. And then if you feel like you want to bring even more attention to the shapes, you can choose a slightly darker shade than what you use for the background and kind of add some lines below the white cloud shapes to almost create this small shadow. I made sure to blend these out pretty well so that nothing looks too dark or harsh. But after that, the whole sky is done and we can jump to the final part of the painting, which is adding the leaves and flowers to the bottom edge. I added these two new colors to my painting palette at this point. So we need a medium green shade and then a darker brown, green or blue. Any of those would totally work. I also switched to a smaller and pointier round brush at this point. So I used some of the blue shade to mix into the green to make it slightly more muted and match the rest of the color palette. And first, you'll see me just adding a few leaves here and there. So these were just guidelines for myself as to how high I roughly wanted the leaves to go. So it was easier to do this next step where we'll take a bunch of that darker shade and basically start tapping this all along the bottom edge. I know this might seem a little bit crazy, but it will all come together. If it makes you feel better, you can always start from lighter shades, but having enough darkness here is definitely gonna help build up the leaf area. I didn't tap the dark shade too high, so you can start to blend in some lighter tones, and then when we're starting to reach the top line of the leaf section, it's a good idea to start spacing out the colors a little bit and create more defined leaf shapes. These don't need to be anything special. Any small oval or triangular shapes will work. It will definitely require some practice to paint really small shapes, and often the problem might also be your brush. So I always use a very small brush or just the tip of it to create as small and sharp shapes as possible. I have really enjoyed these Etchr Lab brushes. They were sent to me for free, so a disclaimer there. But they have a pointier tip than some other brushes I own, which makes painting details easier. I do wish you were able to buy these separately, but maybe they'll add that option in the future. At least we can hope. I also tapped some darker shades to the leaves, which added some shadows and variation, and then I also took some much lighter shades that I used to create these lighter leaves here and there, which again just helps to fill up the space and make it seem like some of the leaves are further away from us and some are crispier and darker at the front. But then it's time for the very last step, which was painting the flowers. So for this, I added a bright red shade to my palette and I mixed a little bit of the peach and orange shades to it, which will just tone it down slightly. I usually like to paint with quite muted tones and they can be hard to find straight from the tube. But luckily, if you take some time to experiment with blending different shades together, you can create any color you want from just a few basic primary colors. Anyway, there is really no secret to how to paint these flowers. I just created some small uneven dots and spaced them out to these branches. And after the main color, you can blend a much darker red shade and add some dots, especially to the lower parts of the flowers, which will somehow make them much more realistic looking, at least in my opinion. I think adding some darkness often helps with details like this, so I did that and then finished things up with a few white dots because I think most paintings can benefit with a sprinkle of white to brighten things up. So that's finally it for this first painting, and of course you could always paint more flowers or take them much higher, but I really tried to go for this minimal look here and let the colors in the sky shine. But now let's start working on the second painting, and we're gonna start in a very similar way by painting the sky with a flat brush. I was using whatever colors I had left in my palette, but you can always add fresh paints as well if you need to. Anyway, I started with this peachy shade again, and the sky might look a little bit strange at first for this second painting, but it will all come together. I basically wanted to create some kind of lake scenery here with these peach and light green tones. So I added a line of green kind of to the middle and then blended a tiny bit of the blue shade to the very bottom edge, just to make it appear a little bit darker. Again, if you don't like how your initial layers look, you can always go back and add another layer on top. But then after the sky, the first thing we're gonna paint here are these very light peachy mountains. I used pretty much the straight color from my tube, and I think it looked just a tiny bit dark here, so I actually took a bit of white to my brush, mixed some water with it, and went over the top layer again, which kind of helped to make the mountains lighter and created this almost misty look that I quite liked actually. I think this would be a useful technique in some other paintings too. The white paint will get slightly less intense when it dries down, so I know it looks like I basically covered all the mountains, but they will reappear while we work on the other details. But next, let's continue working on the middle section. So again, I didn't really paint any specific shapes here, but I tried to make it look like there are some trees in the distance. And since this is a lake, I also took whatever colors I was using a little bit lower to create the water reflection. I was using a little bit different style horizontal strokes with the water part, and also tried to blend things together a little bit more. But after you're happy with this middle green part, I took some white paint and started to create these white horizontal strokes to the middle, and also painted a small white sun to the sky. Using a flat brush works really well to create these water reflections, and I also took the white paint a little bit along the forest line, which helps to differentiate the forest from where the water begins. Then you can also mix some darker horizontal stripes with the white to add even more dimension to the water part. I don't really know how to explain what I was doing here any better than that, so I hope you can see what I was trying to do from the video. Okay, so now that the background and lake are done, you could either leave the painting like this or continue with me to paint some hanging leaves on top of everything. This is what Bob Ross would call the bravery test, because it feels quite counterintuitive to start painting dark strokes on top of what we just painted, but I think the end result looks pretty nice. So I used a slightly darker color than anything we have on this painting this far, and just started to create these long leaf shapes that are hanging from the top corner. I try to keep them facing generally in the same direction, but you can change the angles and shapes slightly to add this effect that the wind is blowing the leaves. And again, similarly to what we did in the first painting, I added some different shades of green here to add some dimension. So I added some lighter leaves kind of to the background, and then added a few very dark leaves at the end, because I felt like this painting needed some more contrast. You can also add a few flyaway leaves towards the bottom, almost like they've fallen into the water. I finished this painting with a few more white dots to the water and by intensifying the middle forest colors slightly. But after that, we are done with the second painting too. It's always extra satisfying to peel the tapes and reveal both of these paintings at once. And I really hope you enjoyed following along and liked the minimal result and springy color palette. However, both of these paintings could be painted with many different colors as well, so feel free to experiment and change things up. If this was your first time around here and you'd like to stay tuned for more, definitely consider subscribing or checking out my shop or Patreon, which are linked in the description. But I guess that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!